Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 30th of May 2018, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me in the studio today, Mark Anderson from Stop the Presses. Welcome to the programme, Mark.
Great to be back after being on last Friday, my second live appearance.
And Alex Thompson from Eastern Approaches. Welcome to the programme, Alex.
Good afternoon, Mike and Mark. Good to be with you. People probably hear I'm slightly recovering from a summer cold, but otherwise okay.
Okay, good stuff. Now, Alex, we're going to start straight away with the Italian coup. We're calling it an Italian coup. Really spectacular events going on in Italy with the President Sergio Mattarella appointing an IMF economist, an ex-IMF economist, that is, to form a government. I mean, this guy really didn't have any mandate from the electorate, and he's put in place as interim prime minister Carlo Cottarelli. He was known as Mr. Scissors in the past for cuts to public spending in Italy, and of course the mainstream media is presenting this as his being appointed as a result of the collapse of talks between the two so-called populist parties in Italy who were trying to form this coalition government. But of course, why did the coalition government talks collapse? Because Sergio Mattarella had refused to accept their decision about who would be the Italian finance minister. So on screen at the moment we've got Carlo Cottarelli, Mr. Scissors himself. The latest news is today that it's unlikely he will even take the oath of office because he is not going to be in a position to form any government, and there's a possibility that Mattarella is going to have to call elections within a month or so, fresh elections. Even Bloomberg, Mattarella said that he had taken this action in order to protect the euro, because of course these two so-called populist parties were promoting the idea of a Glass-Steagall style bank separation. They were also promoting the idea of a national bank as opposed to a central bank. So this was something which was seen as a massive threat to the euro system. But even Bloomberg here, the headline, Italy's president just undermined the euro. They're suggesting yesterday that these actions have achieved exactly the thing that Mattarella was attempting to prevent. As I say, why was this going on? Well, Alessandro De Battista, the leader of the Five Star Party, one of the two potential coalition partners, said this. They prevented this government because they are terrified of banking separation and a state bank for investments. Alex, what are your thoughts on what's been going on in Italy? Is it unfair to say that this was a pretty dictatorial move by the president?
Dictatorial is the right word there, Mike. What people have to recognise here is, okay, we've got two nationalities speaking here. We're British. We have a sovereign monarch as head of state. Mark has an American elected president. But the Italian and indeed the German model, followed in much of the continent actually, is a third way. Italy had a choice after the war whether to become a monarchy or a republic after the fall of fascism, and chose by 1 percentage point to go with the Republican model. But then, of course, the Allies, as they did in Germany, the other defeated power, imposed their own version of a presidency. What you get is a party hack, in this case, Signor Mattarella, who is a lifelong member of the party machine, Minister of Education in the past, Minister of Defence, lifelong Christian Democrat, these very Vatican-linked, nominally Roman Catholic conservative parties of the continent, whose main job is to make sure no opposition appears on the right. And so Signor Mattarella has foreign loyalties. He's not like a President Trump or any incumbent of the White House who's sworn an oath of office to defend the Constitution. Signor Mattarella can get away with saying, I have decided to dismiss the main parties elected and their Prime Minister designate because of a threat to something that had nothing to do with Italy at all, called the euro, which he dresses up in silly language about the solemn choice of our young people. The German European Commissioner, of course, you lose your nationality when you become a commissioner. Your oath of loyalty is to the EU. But the Commissioner from Germany for budget, Günther Oettinger rather let the cat out of the bag on Deutsche Welle, the German equivalent of BBC World Service, before the denouement of these events, by saying that in the coming days the markets would suitably punish the Italian people to make them aware that they couldn't choose what he called left or right populists. Of course, Cinque Stelle is the left populist side of the equation, and the Lega Nord, the right populists, and these two got together. As you correctly say, they had an agreement under Signor Conte, the Prime Minister designate, about the whole cabinet, and they decided, both parties, to call the President's bluff and thereby call the Eurocrats' bluff by saying we are not going to change our nomination of Paolo Savona, the intended Minister of the Economy, who's come up with these unacceptable ideas that you just put on screen. We insist on having the full cabinet ratified. This forced the Italian president for the first time to show that in the EU model, particularly in the defeated Axis powers of Italy and Germany, which are now vassal states of Anglo-America, the president's job is actually to look after the banking cabal, and it's not actually to uphold the constitution or to be loyal to the people of the country over whom he lords it.
Well, thank you very much for that. Now, of course, right at the heart of this is the issue is an issue of sovereignty and how that sovereignty is taken forward. Now, there's been some communication regarding EU military union here. Sovereignty seems to be the hardest word, is how you've headlined this. What's our illustrious Minister of War up to?
We have various things that he's doing. Of course, people have seen the silly interview with the Minister of Defence, which Brian tweeted before the show. But this is his number 2 in the House of Lords, whom you mentioned the other day, Mike. It's the Minister, of course, Freddie Howe, yes. And the key point is that a dogged constituent of an MP, because the Lords don't have geographical constituencies, but through their local member of Parliament, an UK column viewer, suitably informed by UK column news reporting by David Ellis and also by Veterans for Britain, has raised with the Minister what on earth is going on with PESCO and the alphabet soup of entanglements. The pinned tweet on the Veterans for Britain is the best illustration of this. But as you see, I've underlined in the left here that Lord Howe has given a sort of side shot at UK column by saying your constituent. He's talking over the viewer's head to the Member of Parliament, of course, as per protocol. Your constituent may have been misled by inaccurate reporting of UK involvement in EU military structures. But on the right is the reply to Vera Hobhouse, the constituent of the viewer. Nothing deterred. He says, I'm sorry, we can't close correspondence at this point because Lord Howe has still refused to talk about sovereignty. He's in his second letter of reply, which is the one on the left here. We haven't bothered you with the back chain because that's all too general. But in the second letter, Lord Howe is still talking about operational matters. He's not daring to use the word sovereignty. And now he's being pressed via the Member of Parliament concerned to talk about who has sovereignty over the armed forces. This is the point that, of course, the MOD does not want to answer.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned the silly little video, as you say, but we're actually going to watch this because there are a couple of interesting points to come out of this interview of the Defence Secretary by Richard Madeley on ITV. So let's just watch a little bit of this. This is a bit longer than the piece of video that was really doing the rounds, but I think it's worth it to get the context.
Asked you to shut up and go away. Do you regret that now? Do you think that was a bit too informal?
Well, I'd like to pay tribute to the health service personnel.
No, sorry, can you answer the question? No. I'm sure you do want to pay tribute to them. No, Mr. Williamson. I asked you a straight question. We can talk about tributes to the health services in a minute. Do you regret using that kind of casual language? That's the question. Could you answer that question, please?
Well, what we saw an atrocious attack on British soil. You saw British, a British citizen and his daughter that were targeted. And actually how we responded to that is the world united behind Britain.
Yes.
And
do you regret telling Russia to shut up and go away? Mr. Williamson, please answer the question. Mr. Williamson, you're just not answering the question. Mr. Williamson, I'm asking the question not on my behalf, but on behalf of our viewers. So on behalf of the viewers, would you please answer the question? Do you now regret telling a nation state to shut up and go away? Do you think that was too casual an expression? Can you please answer that question?
Well, I think that what everyone saw is Russia's actions against our citizens in a city here in the United Kingdom.
Yes, you're telling us what we know. We know what happened in the city. We know what happened in Salisbury. We know how atrocious it was. We know how close these people came to death. The question is, I'll try it one more time. Do you regret using very casual Trump-esque language like shut up and go away? Please don't tell me what happened, because we know what happened. Do you regret using that language? That is the question.
Well, what was right is actually we came together with our allies and made it absolutely clear to Russia that they couldn't act in that behaviour, and I think that was the right thing to do.
Interview terminated because you won't answer the question. Good luck with the African Elephant project. That is an excellent thing to do, but it would be helpful if you answered a straight question with a straight answer.
That was the Defence Secretary, Gavin Williamson. They're also joined by Major James Cohen. They were talking about troops being deployed to Malawi and not talking about
what
he
like?
had to say about Russia.
What are these politicians like? You give them a straight question. It would have been so easy to say, no, I don't. I think it was an appropriate expression, or to say, yes, probably on reflection, I should have perhaps been a little more formal.
Alex Medley is exactly on the money there. It would have been very easy for Gavin Williamson to give a straight answer to the question. But looking around the comments that I've seen about Medley's approach here, he's mostly getting a lot of positive response in that many people commenting that for the first time they're seeing somebody, and particularly with his background in sort of popular television, that they're mostly surprised to see him taking this approach. But they're complimenting him for the fact that he is one of the few, if the only, that are willing to take this kind of stand against politicians. There aren't many that are prepared to do that these days.
Yes, I'll be interested to get Mark's view as an intelligent American involved in this in a moment, because, of course, the British have a certain cachet in the world, and the idea is that you can't easily rankle a British interviewer. They're supposed to have a certain calm, you know, and particularly foreign viewers might not know this, but Richard and Judy is a set term in British TV. These were mostly interviewers from the sofa doing breakfast TV for many years. Tell us about your new recipe type stuff. And if they blow a gasket, you really, really have to try very hard to get that kind of result. You're scraping the bottom of the barrel there. Someone in the chat box has already said that this is very reminiscent of the classic 1970s British sitcom called Some Mothers Do Have 'Em, as in Aveem. And if people want to look up Some Mothers Do Have 'Em, there was a character called Frank Spencer who was a Wally of exactly the same, and even the same Yorkshire accent, actually, the same mould as Mr. Williamson there. He's a absolutely professional grade Wally act. But the serious point here is, as David Ellis has been raising on Twitter, whose interests does it serve to have a nincompoop as Her Majesty's Secretary of State for War with elephants wandering around behind him? Well, it's very poetic, isn't it? The elephant in the room you won't talk about. Well, of course, it serves the interests of the Bank for International Settlements and the hedge fund above that, which are very keen to ease and push us into EU military unification while all this distraction goes on. So if you have somebody who can't answer a straight question, that is a great sideshow to distract people from what's going on.
Yeah, you also wonder if the reporter, too, is part of the sideshow. It's nice to see challenging questioning going on by any member of the mainstream press at a time when the mainstream press is really losing credibility because they don't ask the tough questions, because they omit things that we ought to know, and they tell us things that are lies or distortions. So the reporter's approach is good. It's refreshing in that sense, but it's kind of a to and fro, frick and frack, dog and pony show in my initial view here, having seen it for the first time. While it's good the reporter's asking the tough questions, will we ever really get the answers we need about military unification and the loss of sovereignty and all of that, or will it just be what looks like tough questioning but ultimately doesn't go anywhere?
I think fair enough, but at the same time, what has been shown here, Gavin Williamson has been exposed because he was not able to even intelligently respond to the sort of repeated questioning of repeated asking of the same question. So by the time the question had been asked the second or third time, he was stuck for words and was making it up as he went along. So he clearly wasn't he clearly hadn't thought he was going to be asked that question.
Yeah, it did expose the minister, the official, as being very short on answers and being very, very elusive as to even the most simple question. So it does have that value, absolutely.
Yep, absolutely incompetent. Now, let's get on to this missile defense. RUSI, Alex, is holding their Missile Defense Conference 2018 today. This is what they say about it. A major highlight in the missile defense calendar. The RUSI Missile Defense Conference will contribute to the evolution of policy with a stimulating discussion of missile defense issues between senior policymakers and practitioners. It is an element of the Institute's Marshall Power Programme. The 18th annual conference in this series is very timely, with missile defense coming to the forefront of policymakers' minds. The conference will address the North Korean nuclear threat and how it will have evolved, and East Asian missile defense issues more widely. The ballistic missile and nuclear threat in the Middle East will also be considered in light of the United States withdrawal from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, and the proliferation of ballistic missiles in Yemen and Syrian conflicts will also be themes for discussion. So they have people speaking like Brad Clark, Director of Nuclear Policy, Office for Secretary of Defense from the United States. They do have a Russian representative, that's Maxim Sizov, the First Secretary of the Russian Embassy to the UK. They've got Frank Rose, who's a Senior Fellow, Security and Strategy at Foreign Policy Programme at the Brookings Institution. And then we're into the Royal United Services Institute. Well, it's their event, so it's fair enough they should have somebody. Centre for Science and Security Studies at King's College. We've got Rubicon Consulting Limited. We've got Centre for Strategic and International Studies, Atlantic Treaty Association, and so on. I was pretty staggered at the ticket prices. You can get a standard ticket to this event for £1,008. If you're a corporate member, it comes down to £818. If you're an academic, you can get a ticket for £108. So that's all pretty good deal there. That's going on at the moment. We'll report a bit more on that tomorrow. But in the meantime, this is going on. So this is Fort Russ. They're reporting this all across the Polish media at the moment. But their headline in Fort Russ is "Occupation Tribute: Poland to pay $2 billion." For US military base. And they're saying the proposal outlines the clear and present need for a permanent US armoured division deployed in Poland. This is a quote from the Polish Ministry of Defence report, apparently. It says Poland's commitment to provide significant support may reach $1.5 to $2 billion, as it will establish joint military installations and provide for more flexible movement of US forces. Alex, my understanding is that the people of Poland are going absolutely ballistic about this, if you'll excuse the pun, because they have not given any approval to this. This is this government in Poland operating beyond their authority, and I'm hearing from local people in Poland the continuing rumbling of trains carrying heavy weaponry, heavy armaments to various parts of Poland as the US establishes its presence there. Again, we're talking about sovereignty in many ways, and in fact, the Fort Russ article makes this point. They say the real problem with this proposal is that it effectively is a relinquishment of Poland's sovereignty and an invitation to indefinite occupation by US NATO forces, which threaten to turn Poland into a battlefield in their next conflict with Russia. I think that is a very astute comment. And I think you correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's the case that once the US has established a foothold in one country or another, they pretty much never leave. Is that right, Mark?
Oh, absolutely. Look at the post-World War II occupation of Germany. You'd think that by our bases in Japan and Germany that World War II never ended, the way the U.S. military operates, and this is a sad continuation of that same basic geopolitical outlook. The U.S. can do no wrong. It must be welcome wherever it goes. How could anyone disagree? And the taxpayers of Poland will be milked for this to the tune of, as you said, $2 billion, and them having a choice or consent is just not on the table, at least most of the people.
Indeed. So, Alex, what are your thoughts?
This is the doctrine of limited sovereignty for Central and Eastern Europe in action. It's almost as if you have victors' rights throughout the 20th century to impose this limited sovereignty on the whole belt of countries between Germany and Russia, all the way from Finland down to Greece, I'm talking about. And indeed, the US has moved some tanks from Norway to Finland to be one country closer to Russia as we speak. And the Marine Times article covering that said in the first sentence, Marines are doing this in preparation for a fight with Russia. Now, this is a bit like having a clash in Gaza, isn't it? If you engage Russia, you don't have a fight, you have a Third World War. So what's going on is the first to enunciate this doctrine that the countries between Germany and Russia couldn't be allowed to have sovereignty over their own military forces was Friedrich Naumann, the granddaddy of German liberalism. I mean, in terms of a political movement, not an ideology, because he was far from liberal in that sense. Naumann, in 1915, in his book Mitteleuropa, said, when we've won the war, these countries in the belt between us and Russia will only be able to act with our say-so, and we'll be stationing our troops there, and they'll be paying for the privilege. After the Second World War, the zone is owned by the Soviets, and what happens? You have a Brezhnev doctrine of limited sovereignty. Cold War, collapse of the Soviet Union, exfiltration of the same globalist revolutionary ideology to the West. Neocons in Israel, America, Britain, and France now rule the roost unperturbed, apart from a bit of rumbling from Russia and China. And what do we find? The West, in the guise of NATO, the protection racket NATO, saying there is limited sovereignty for countries like Poland and Romania. If we wish to station Patriot batteries, as it was 10 years ago, or now hypersonic missile defenses, such as we have, because we're years behind the Russians, then you will jolly well accept them and pay through the nose for the privilege. It seems to me that the countries of Central and Eastern Europe have been defeated by a single large enemy, which began as Germany, went through being the Soviet Union, and is now the West.
That's an excellent way of detailing what I was getting at, Alex. That really sums it up well.
Alex, somebody in the chat box saying, Beata, talking about Beata, said, well, the Prime Minister of Poland, Beata should work out that Russia is not her enemy. Now, there's a couple of reasons why it's a bit beyond Beata and the rest of the current government there, and that is because they still blame Russia for the plane crash at Smolensk, which killed Kaczynski, Lech Kaczynski's brother, and a significant proportion of the Polish elite. So that they seem to not be able to get past that. But I was in Warsaw in back when they were running the referendum about whether they would join the European Union or not. And there was a very, very small opposition to joining the European Union. The Polish people saw the EU, they saw the money that the EU was spreading around in other countries like Ireland, for example. They wanted their share of it. And so there was a very small opposition in Poland at the time. And I remember seeing a sign being held up, a placard being held up saying, first it was the Germans, then it was the Russians. Now we want to be occupied by the European Union. This was the opposition attempting to make this point. The Polish don't seem to get to the grips with their own sovereignty. I mean, you're talking about how foreign powers have tried to impose limited sovereignty on Poland, but that country, the people of that country don't seem to get to grips with the concept of sovereignty for themselves.
No, and this is the downfall of one of Europe's most gifted and bravest countries, and always has been. Okay, they couldn't do anything about the dismemberment into three by the powers of Prussia, Austria, and Russia in the Napoleonic era. They disappeared off the map for over a century. But that said, such an intelligent nation, it always upsets me to see how easily they have been played like a fiddle by the French between the wars. When Edmund Hrashkiewicz was the right-hand man of Marshal Pilsudski, who ran the government in those interwar years. And Hrashkiewicz, under the banner of "we must defeat Bolshevism," which is quite admirable in and of itself, ran away with this and developed a theory of Prometheism. Basically, the Poles are offering themselves up in this doctrine to be the playthings of the French and, in a lesser extent, the British. And in many ways, the Poles won the war for us through their, obviously, their military contributions were splendid, but also through their signals intelligence contributions. They were well ahead of the Western Allies in breaking German codes, which was one of the key war-winning assets. But all this time, the Poles have been really, you can see it also with Poland's marriage to the sea in 1920. They get carried away with themselves when they defeat the Red Army in the miracle of the Vistula in 1920. And they start thinking, well, we're more than just a nation. We actually have a role to lead the whole of Central and Eastern Europe towards, well, what? Towards some postmodern European blob idea, which is greatly at odds with the patriotism and conservatism of the Polish nation. So yes, they have a lot to work out, the Poles. They've got to work out that they're still being played, and it's difficult for the most intelligent nations to admit this, that they still have psychological mechanisms in place, and that they need to overturn the foreign loyalties of the ruling caste over them. I think once the Poles have got that sorted, they'll be in a much better place, and so will we.
Couldn't agree more. Okay, now let's move on to Project Argus. Now the image of the image I've chosen for this is showing space-based weaponry. When you look at what the DSTL reporting down has pushed out on this, the image doesn't quite fit. But I'll explain why we've chosen that particular image as we go on here, because the headline on the press release was "Citizen Scientists Look to the Skies to Help DSTL Study." Space scientists at the Defence Science and Technology Laboratory are engaging with amateur astronomers to help them observe the night sky. This sounds really nice. Good fun for everybody to get involved with. Known as Project Argus, enthusiastic members from the Basingstoke Astronomical Society will look for and catalogue satellites and other objects orbiting the Earth. They will be paying particular attention to a new device being deployed from the International Space Station, which will send out a net to catch old or unused satellites. The increasing problem of space junk means scientists across the world are looking for new solutions to bring down or deorbit used satellites. The project will gather a range of data which will be used to advise the Ministry of Defence on what equipment capabilities they need to effectively monitor the population of satellites and junk in the Earth's orbit. So we start to get a hint as to what's going on here. Andrew Ash from the space team at DSTL said, "Previously we've used information shared by our US colleagues. Space is so crowded now with more universities and other non-traditional partners launching satellites that we may well need our own capability. If we can harness information which some very good amateur astronomers are collecting, we can assess whether we can use an off-the-shelf solution. This is the potential to have save a huge amount of money for the Ministry of Defence." But look, Alex, what was obvious is this is the DSTL presenting this, not the UK Space Agency. So this is not a civilian operation here. We're bringing civilians into it to look through their telescopes and count objects in the sky and watch the progress of this net that they're going to deploy from the International Space Station. But I find the language very interesting. The increasing problem of space junk means scientists across the world are looking for new solutions to bring down or deorbit used satellites. But of course, if what you're doing is developing a weapon systems for space, then perhaps one of the things that you want to do would be to bring down or deorbit enemy satellites. What I've got on screen at the moment is from a DSTL presentation to the Basingstoke Astronomical Society. It's talking about the DSTL Space Programme 2022 vision, exploiting the full potential of space for UK defence and security. So it's quite clear this is not a civilian programme. They say we've built a thriving space S&T programme. We've identified, designed and developed innovative and resilient space concepts and technologies, collaborating both nationally and internationally. These are on track to be exploited, and Ministry of Defence has now has enhanced understanding of the military potential of space. This is not ambiguous. It's pretty clear what they're talking about. Another slide from the same presentation, intelligence, surveillance and reconnaissance, and talking about accelerating the UK scientific sector in a meaningful way for Earth observation, working across all of government to consider the challenges of having a single national Earth observation centre. So we're talking about, increasing capability to spy from space. Alex, this is something you've been talking about for quite some time, the dangers of weaponizing space. So I was just interested to get some thoughts from you on this.
We don't want to go too deep for a lunchtime news slot, but basically what this is the reflex in the context of fake Brexit of much deeper plans, which have been more in the US deep state, I think, than in ours, because they've always been more sympathetic to what you could call the Platonist model of elitism, which involves conquering infrastructure and harnessing the population to work on it, rather than Britain's traditional Aristotelian or Hobbesian model, which is, keep the people nasty, brutish and short their lives. But now we have this kind of semi-divorce, at least at official level. You see it in the Galileo GPS wars of the moment as well, with the Germans saying the Brits can't be involved after Brexit, and the French and the other important Germanic countries saying, no, actually, we should have them in. It's a reflex of that. It's basically the British deep state in its usual non-transparent way, saying we actually realise that we're going to be out and out at war with the Chinese and the Israelis for domination of space. This is Ronald Reagan was prescient in this, or his advisors knew what was coming, so he pushed Star Wars, which was about knocking out the enemy's satellites. It's also about having a series of LEO, low Earth orbiting satellites to read the RFID chips, which even in the 1970s were planned to be implanted in all of us and could be read from space. For that, I spoke about it at AV9. If you look up an interview with William Pawlek, Pawelec, he talks about that from the 1970s period, although it's a posthumous interview given later in life. So it is actually about military infrastructure. The MOD's logo was on those slides. I do think also there's a particular kind of disingenuous Britishness involved here. If the Chinese, or as the Chinese want to dominate space, they harness, the population very overtly. They conscript a couple of thousand good scientists into a building and say, you are here to work out how to dominate space for China. What do the Brits do? They write letters to Basingstoke Astronomical Society, whom I imagine, perhaps unfairly, in their knitted jumpers and their mugs of coffee, saying, would you mind awfully crowdsourcing our plan for world domination so it doesn't look too scary?
Yes, okay, that's fair enough. Okay, well, look, let's move on to the attack on Russia. And it continues here with a US think tank. This is the Center for Security Policy. And they were founded in July 1988 by 30 national security policy practitioners. It's led by Frank Gaffney, who was a Reagan Defense Department official. I think you said Frank Gaffney was a neoconservative?
Oh, absolutely. He's among that coterie.
Right. And Alex, this was sent through to you yesterday, I believe. Refugees the world over, it says, fleeing economic hardship, natural disaster and warfare have long looked to Europe as a prime destination. The impact of their mass migration there has predictably been deeply traumatizing for the host nations and their citizens. This is especially true of the Hijra, the Islamic practice of migrating Muslim populations to spread the faith, and its supremacist doctrine known as Sharia, that followed the outbreak of the so-called Arab Spring across the Middle East in 2011-2012. What ensued in much of the European Union was a tidal wave of predominantly single military-aged young men in numbers unseen there since the invasion of the Ottoman Empire. It is an open secret that Vladimir Putin has sought to rebuild and exercise Russia's influence for the purpose of exacting revenge against those he holds responsible for the greatest catastrophe of the 20th century, i.e. the fall of the Soviet Union. Preeminent among them is Western Europe and the NATO alliance. Putin's desire to get even can only have intensified with Europe's imposition of sanctions against Russia for its seizure of Crimea and ongoing intervention elsewhere in Ukraine. And so in this new occasional paper issued by the Center for Security Policy entitled Vladimir Putin's Revenge, Russia as a Catalyst for the Refugee Crisis that is Destabilizing Europe, co-authors Jeff Nyquist and Dr. Anka Maria Cernia offer evidence that suggests that the Russian government is deliberately contributing to the world's worst refugee crisis and exploiting its geostrategic effects. Well, I'll let you comment on this, both comment on this in a second, but I was staggered by it really, because it seems that every Western policy is being twisted at the moment, and history being ignored in order to blame Russia for every possible conceivable thing. And at this point, I want to just remind everybody that, of course, it was Peter Sutherland, Arch Bilderberger, an internationalist, who absolutely pro-immigration, who made the statement that the European Union, in his view, should be doing its best to undermine any sense of homogeneity and difference from others. This was never a Russian policy, Alex. This was a Western internationalist policy. And it's a pretty obscene thing for some neocon think tank then to turn that on its head and blame Russia for it.
It is patent neocon, Pap. The neocons like to use Central Europeans. The double bill of the authorship there is Nyquist, a Swede, and Chernea, a Romanian, and a Pole is quoted in the PDF to which the article, the front page links. The usual spread, just like with the Atlantic Council, NATO's think tank, usual spread of Central Europeans who like to downplay how much they have been paid and educated in the West and by the West. With their impressive Central European names, they lend some gravitas and say, trust us, we lived under communism. And so we're supposed to read this and think, oh, really? No, naughty Vlad, he's sending some Muslim immigrants our way. I mean, how illiterate is that? Everyone, I'll accept an argument that everyone in the world who's got some power has sent Islamic radicalism into Europe, except Russia. Russia is the one party that has never done that. That you could say that Soros or the Church of England or the city or the Vatican or any such argument I'll accept is not too wacky as being behind the Islamic immigration and the stoking of it, even more than the Saudis and Qataris. But Russia, let's not forget, well, we're not supposed to know this, of course, we're supposed to take it on trust from these authors. Russia has a massive southern underbelly of Tatars, Caucasians of various kinds, who are just one step away from being inflamed in Islamic radicalism, Wahhabism as they call it in Russia. And of course the Russians have been beating this back for 20 years. You can trace it up through the Western intelligence agencies right up as far as the Rothschild level, that since the war, as part of Gladio, we have been doing this. We've been training Middle Eastern insurgents to head towards Russia and destabilize it. This is well known by now. And Russia actually has got an answer to this, to impose a civic identity of Russianness on the Russian people, so that the Tatars in particular are quite happy to be not very observant Muslims. It's a batty argument, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just add that it's so blatantly obvious. What makes this all the more egregious is it's so blatantly obvious that Western-spawned wars are the ones driving the migration of Muslims and North Africans and other peoples into Europe. I mean, it's just so blatantly obvious, which makes it all the more insulting to our intelligence to hear what you talked about, Mike. The West is clearly and singularly responsible for the vast majority of that migration, forced migration.
Forced migration and people trafficking. Alex, I don't know if you have an answer to this, but I mean, to what degree, relative to interest in the West, do you think the Russians are elements within Russia are involved in large-scale people trafficking?
I don't think they've been in that market for 20 years, Mike. They had a very good, very competent mafia state in the 90s. It was, dominating the Afghan drug trade, for example, through the Russian military convoys going westwards to Eastern Europe, until about shortly after 9/11. And then, of course, they got muscled out by the NATO gangs. So that wherever the drugs are, the money and the people trafficking is the same route through the Balkans. So no, the Russians have been displaced by Western-favoured, mostly nominal Islamic nationalities, Albanians, for example. They have taken over the thuggery on those routes. The Russians, when they do intervene in such situations, since 1848 onwards, in fact, it has been to oppose Peter Sutherland's view of the world. It has been actually to remove forced homogeneity and to restore the natural order of nation states in Europe.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Well, let's move on to one of the, I suppose, a similar policy, actually, because it's related to the mass movement of people, and that is this business of global cities, Mark. And we have the upcoming Chicago Forum on that subject. Just for people that maybe aren't aware of what the global cities policy is about, just give us a brief background on it, just a couple of seconds.
Well, the Chicago Forum on Global Cities is the most significant forum in the entire world on the global cities movement. And in light of our report on what happened in Italy, installing a banker instead of honoring the wishes of the voters for a more populist nationalist government, the Chicago Forum on Global Cities and the whole global cities movement is advancing the global cities mantra as a weapon against populism. This was admitted by Bruce Katz, who attended Bilderberg 2014. I reported it here previously on the UK column when I was on Skype from America. The global cities isn't just to make cities global, it's to fight against populism like that which has arisen in Austria and Italy and other countries. And so this is a two-pronged thing. It's got a flip side, and that's exactly what the proponents are saying. But anyway, the forum's taking place, as it shows there, June 6th through 8 in Chicago, right in conjunction with Bilderberg taking place June 7th through 10 in Turin, Italy, as I confirmed with Bilderberg's media department recently. And interestingly enough, at the Chicago Global Cities Forum, Charles Bowman, the Lord Mayor of the City of London, is the main guy representing the UK there, not Sadiq Khan, the mayor of the normal London, you might say, which is kind of surprising. And it's interesting, too, just as a footnote, and I'll be doing more research on this to report on here, Mike, that this flap would happen in Italy. The short-circuiting of the popular will in Italy would happen right as Bilderberg is about to meet in Turin. That's a rather interesting coincidence that I'll be taking a much closer look at. But the global cities thing is certainly animating a lot of the Bilderberg discussion last year and a few years before and this year. This is one of the main topics of all the think tanks, Brookings and Bilderberg and the Trilateral Commission. This is the big movement to network the cities together in a different kind of grid and reorient the world without the people's consent and use it as a tool to put a damper on the populist movement. So this is a really big thing to watch here and now and in the foreseeable future.
Thank you, Mark. Right, Alex, let's get up to date with the Hofstra case then.
Yes, I won't read out all these points, but here is just a screenshot for people of the appeal which has gone in by the crowd-funded lawyer for Peter Hofstra. To remind people, this is a man who's been locked up for life by this Professor Waltzel, whose name is on screen, a professor of neurology, who's claimed that Hofstra is a danger to the public and needs to be sectioned, so mentally contained for the rest of his life. And you can see from the points on screen, if people want to freeze the frame, that the same point is made in about 14 different ways over these two slides. These are the summaries by Peter himself of the what the lawyer has said in his argument, which is now before the appeal court in Austria. The key thing, of course, is that Professor Waltzel never assessed Peter Hofstra. He just saw him cursorily, but did not conduct any examination. And the sectioning recommendation that Professor Waltzel made, which got Peter locked up, he just quoted a couple of things that Peter was alleged to have said and said, I can determine that he is definitely a dangerous paedophile. So this is now what's being challenged because of the crowdfunding of both a lawyer and a psychiatrist to challenge this. Peter's just had his birthday. He's been suffering in agony with untreated arthritis symptoms. The hospital in Graz in Austria continues to deny him his medication, and they are not talking to his legal advisors. The hospital are not talking to his legal team about this. We're trying to get this rectified. He's a little more comfortable, but Monday was his birthday, so if people want to send a belated card, there's an update on the Lychee fundraising page. If they put that slide back a moment, if people search for Lychee Hofstra, they'll find this page, and that update in there shows the address to write to. He's hardly able to sit up or hold a pen at the moment, or even a telephone. It's so bad, this arthritis, I'm sorry to say. But the pressure is there, and the more pressure we put on the doctors and nurses, the likelier that he's going to be treated fairly. So there's also some politicians in the background preparing to come back into action for him, but we have to keep that quiet at the moment. The case hasn't gone away. Detective Sergeant Paul Groves of North Yorkshire Police is supposed to be returning the possessions, particularly important is the computers, seized from Mr. Hofstra during a previous stage of the nonsense case against him in Britain. Detective Sergeant Paul Groves, interestingly on LinkedIn on the left there, describes himself as being a specialist for North Yorkshire Police in crimes which would otherwise be considered a risk to the reputation of North Yorkshire Police. Well, that's telling it like it is, isn't it? That's what he's a fixer for them. And on the right, you see Andy Peacher and also my now attempts to talk to this DS Groves and say, we urgently need, Peter Hofstra himself urgently needs his seized computers back to contest the case against him in Austria. And all we get is these, holding responses from him. Andy at the top says, it's been 2 months now. I need answers, please. Can you remember Peter needs his personal data on the PCs? Can you transfer it to a memory stick? Peter requests this be done as soon as possible. That's on the 22nd of May. And then I echoed this politely in a one-liner, saying this is urgent for Peter's current court case, Paul, trusting that you can assist swiftly. And what do I get? No dear, just Mr. Thompson, I am dealing with Mr. Peacher in regard to this matter, and going on about how jolly busy he is and wait your turn. So this is not a good situation.
Okay, well, keep us posted on that one. Well, you've got some information on Melanie Shaw.
We have, to my astonishment, well, I'll talk about the slide, talk about that. Here is a reply from the government. It was sent, first of all, to number 10 Downing Street, the Prime Minister's office, by a viewer, saying what on earth is going on with Melanie Shaw. And it's got the stamps showing that it has been received by number 10 Downing Street and forwarded for a reply to the Ministry of Justice, because it's a prisons query. And if you click on the next button, Mike, you will see a zoom in, what we see there is that I take it that this is the person at number 10 who first read the letter. When they read the paragraph from the viewer saying, "Please will you explain why an identically worded letter is now being sent in response to all inquiries regarding Melanie's current circumstances in Her Majesty's prison style," the flunky who read this put question mark, exclamation mark in the margin.
Yeah.
So this shows to me that there's bafflement at central government about what is going on. When you write to prison governors and all kinds of people, or even others, and the letter gets forwarded to prisons governors, they respond with this identical cookie-cutter letter, semi-literate, talking about UK column news and saying it's a load of nonsense. But as you know, Mike, we've had sources, in fact, prison psychiatrists and others qualified to visit Melanie Shaw at HMP Style, who've been turned away by, I think her name is Mahala McGuffin or something, the young woman who pretends to govern that prison, coming out and saying, "You're not getting to see Shaw today." To my astonishment, last night, none other than Godfrey Bloom, the former MEP who left UKIP, suddenly on a live stream or a live chat with Alex Jones, talked accurately and in detail about Melanie Shaw's case, and the UK column article was put up on screen by the researcher while Alex Jones was interviewing Godfrey Bloom about it. So that is a very positive sign. We didn't know that Mr. Bloom was interested, but it shows that the coverage is spreading. There's massive embarrassment about Melanie Shaw now in government, so this slide shows some of that. The correspondent in question, who's a viewer again, tells me that she's incredulous about the idea, which is in the pane below here, the idea that they couldn't get Melanie's consent because of the Data Protection Act, so in order to say anything about how she's being treated in prison. So she's been disappeared, as Godfrey Bloom correctly said. But what swang it, this is interesting to viewers, I think, is that this viewer sent letters to the now Home Secretary Sajid Javid and to the Member of Parliament Rory Stewart, whom we've spoken about much in the past. And she says, "I'm sure it must have been putting these letters on the politicians' Facebook pages that finally squeezed a reply out of it." And on the next slide, you see what this this post was that forced Rory Stewart and the Home Secretary, Mr. Javid, to take some action and say, "Come on, respond to this." What was said to Mr. Stewart is these are not individual cases, because of course we get palmed off with we can't talk about individual cases. These are not individual cases, but just 2 of thousands which are illustrative of widespread crime and corruption involving police, lawyers, judiciary, court workers and managers, and agencies' responses about individual cases no longer hold water for the British people. They are demanding an investigation into the unbridled corruption involving, for the most part, criminals with law degrees and police officers at the very highest levels. One law firm alone that has been involved in asset stealing, forgery, fraudulent land title transfers, false imprisonment and gagging orders is a very prominent international law firm, and this alone should seriously alarm the global community. Britain is in a state of normalisation of deviance, which will be its demise. So well done, viewers. We need more of this directly on people's, politicians' Facebook and Twitter pages, please.
Absolutely. And what is going on in North Wales then?
Again, thanks to a viewer in North Wales, she has written to Councillor Bobby Feely, who is for the Ruthin ward of the council, that would be, I think, Flintshire Council in North Wales. And the viewer's question is, "Dear Councillor Feely, I have looked at the Council's Homelessness Prevention Action Plan and am at a loss as to the meaning of, quote, develop a holistic homelessness prevention service that is psychologically informed," end quote. That's what the Council in North Wales is going to do to prevent homelessness, be psychologically informed in its prevention. Asking what this is, she gets the response, again, no dears, just Linda. That's how things are these days, apparently. Psychologically informed environments is all about developing an environment that enables citizens to make changes in their lives. This can be expressed in different ways, but will usually be changes in behaviors and/or emotions. For example, an ability to establish and maintain relationships, reduce drug or alcohol use, feel less depressed or fearful. And there's a couple more paragraphs of that guff. I don't believe that local councillors talk like that. I think that template has been provided by someone. Perhaps one or other of you would have an idea about where this nonsense comes from and who is interested in, increasingly in the urban environments, in making sure that people are blamed for their own homelessness.
Well, indeed, Mark, we can't pursue a modern global cities agenda when you've got the streets of your nice, shiny, new smart city littered with those nasty homeless people.
No, you cannot. You have to clean away such inconvenience. Just to address what you said, Alex, it sounds like think tank writing, something along those lines. It's hard to say for sure, but yeah, we got to clean the mess of the actual results and consequences of globalization itself. We have to get that out of the way so we can keep globalizing through global cities.
Because the last thing you would want to do would be to deal with the problems that caused them to be homeless in the first place.
Oh, absolutely. Monetary and otherwise. Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, look, Alex, I regret to say that we're absolutely out of time. But the key message here from this last range of stories that you've shown is that individuals who've been watching UK Column and other alternative media sources are actually starting to take action. This has got to be a very positive development.
Sure is.
Yeah, I think that's the key to it, Mike. There's some causes célèbres around which are attracting far more attention than UK Columns, the cases that UK Column champions. But what's happening now is we're getting a good harnessing of the two, that the perhaps millions who are concerned about certain household names are actually realizing that actually there are other cases of equal or even worse situations which have been less well publicized because they don't have the racial or religious element to them, and they involve simple white-on-white corruption, to put it bluntly. And because UK Column has got an established reputation and some very persistent viewers now, and who write very good letters, the comments being left in strategic places on social media are actually causing a lot more people of quality and concern to take these issues seriously. So I think the days of UK Column casework languishing in obscurity perhaps coming to an end. We're getting some fairly serious politicians with perhaps nothing to lose anymore who are talking openly about what they must have got from UK Column material.
Okay, Alex, thank you very much. We've got to keep this going and keep the momentum building. So thank you very much to everybody that's getting directly involved. That's exactly what we've been hoping we would see. Mark, thank you for joining us again today. We'll have you on again very soon. Thank you, Alex, and thank you for watching. We will be back at the same time, 1 p.m. tomorrow. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.